The second and latest installment of the classic Doctor Who stories to be colorized has now been released. Doctor Who: The War Games in Color. This original 1969 black and white 10-episode epic has been reimagined into a cut-down 90-minute feature-length version, complete with a brand new soundtrack, new sound effects, updated CGI, and now available in full color. But the biggest question is, what is this new version like, and how does it compare to the original? Well, let's find out.
I'm the Doctor.
Fantastic. I reverse the polarity of the neutron flow.
Have you ever thought what it's like to be wanderers in the fourth dimension?
So in anticipation of this new colour release, I decided to go back and rewatch the original, since it had been quite a few years since I last saw it, and I have to say, I forgot just how great The War Games actually is. You can see why it's heralded as one of the all-time greats of Doctor Who. The War Games is masterfully written by Terrance Dicks and Malcolm Hulke, and directed so brilliantly by David Maloney. It's packed with mystery, intrigue, action, drama, and suspense. Every character adds depth to the story, and they all feel distinct. However, it's the villains that really stand out. General Smythe, the security chief, the warlord, and my personal favourite, the war chief. Each add a different layer of threat, and their own unique form of menace. And then there's everything else that the story establishes to the Doctor Who lore, introducing us to the Doctor's own people, the Time Lords. Now sure, if you really stop to think about it, the details on how the warlord plans to use these soldiers to conquer the galaxy might not be fully explained, but honestly, it's easy to overlook when everything else is so damn good. But what I wanted to do with my most recent rewatch was to see if there was anything that really dragged, or if there was anything that I could see that could benefit from being cut or condensed to make for a stronger or quicker paced version. And honestly, there is some slight repetition towards the middle section of the story, with Jamie and Lady Jennifer getting captured in the American Civil War zone, then escaping and getting captured again, and maybe one or two scenes here with the Resistance. But other than that, I never found myself bored or looking at my watch saying, man, this really doesn't justify being 10 episodes long, because the story moves along and flows at such a steady pace. Now, for the benefit of those watching who haven't actually seen the story, I'll briefly summarize the plot. The Doctor and his companions, Jamie and Zoe, find themselves caught in a series of mysterious battlefields, each set in a different period of history. As they investigate, they soon discover that the shadowy figure known as the Warlord is orchestrating these wars, abducting soldiers from various time periods and creating an army with plans to conquer the galaxy. The Doctor finds himself pitted against impossible odds, and the only way out is the unthinkable, seeking help from the ones he fears the most, his own people, the Time Lords. Let's talk colorization. The colorization itself is incredibly stunning. Everything has been beautifully brought to life, authentically capturing the look of landscapes, set interiors, costumes, even skin tones, and most importantly, at no point throughout this entire viewing experience can you tell that this was once black and white. It's honestly that good. This level of mastery in the colorization process is a true testament to the skill and dedication of the team involved, making the entire experience feel new while remaining faithful to the essence of the original. The one thing that was very apparent with the Daleks in color was that the colorization itself was not aiming to capture the look of the original production had it been shot in color. They decided to take a more artistic approach, having bright, vivid colors that give a sort of 1950s, early 60s Technicolor look and feel. This time round, they've been more faithful to the look of the original production, which I honestly appreciate a whole lot more. And yeah, there's some instances where they have made some alterations, like the colours are slightly more saturated than they would be, and some subtle changes here and there on how they actually looked. But personally, I think that these changes are all justifiable. For instance, if we take a look at this trial scene of the new colorized version, the Time Lord's robes are now dark blue and white, as opposed to being their original black and white. Now here is a version that I've decided to put together with some color trickery in my editing software, which tries to match closer to what the original colors on the costume would have looked like. Now you can see in my version, in terms of colors, it's very flat, very much black against black. This change in the new version makes it visually more striking, making the colors stand out against a very plain black background. So from a visual standpoint, you can see why they tweaked it, and it makes sense. Changes like that, I'm perfectly fine with. There's also newly discovered film material from episode 1 that has been colorized and remastered in high def. These film inserts are a significant improvement in quality over the DVD release. Let's discuss the music in this new release. The new added music, though certainly more dramatic and attempting to heighten the tension, frequently drowns out a lot of the dialogue. The score in the original was a lot more subtle, often allowing dialogue and character interactions to take center stage. The new music is now louder and much more bombastic, and sometimes can feel completely unnecessary altogether. However, there was one piece of music in particular that I thought truly highlighted an already great scene, which was when the Doctor bids farewell to his companions. The new soft, sorrowful music added more emotion to the scene, making it even more impactful. But while the new soundtrack might have been intended to modernize the story for a 2024 audience, it often feels more of a distraction, overpowering most scenes. Moving on to the editing. Now, this is where I get into my biggest issue with this new version. When compared to the previous colorization, the Daleks in color, the editing in this version suffers from a similar problem. In particular, scenes that have been edited together that feel almost like watching a series of montages. It is thankfully not as excessive as the Daleks in color though, like there's no unnecessary repetitive flashback sequences, but it still feels like too much of the story has been cut to fit the new runtime. And I really think that this could have benefited from another 20 to 30 minutes, allowing certain scenes the ability to breathe. To give you an idea on just how much was cut from the original story, I'll go through and I'll show you just how much of each episode remains in this new version. Episode 1 and 2 both have about 12 minutes each. Episode 3 has 7 minutes. Episode 4 has almost 10 minutes. Episode 5 has 2.5 minutes. Episode 6 has 4.5 minutes. Episode 7 has 5 minutes. Episode 8 has 6 minutes. And episodes 9 and 10 have about 14 minutes each. The original 10-episode story had a runtime of 250 minutes. That's 25 minutes per episode. And this new version is now 90 minutes long, meaning that something like 64% of the original story has been removed. The most noticeable cuts are the removal of nearly all characterization from all the secondary characters. Additionally, almost all of the subplot involving the resistance fighters has also been removed. There's new added ADR in certain scenes as well, which is used to push along the plot. But I have to say, in some scenes, like when the Romans are charging towards the Doctor and co, it feels very out of place. Especially when you have Zoe saying, "We're being attacked by Romans." It's like, okay, we can visually see that. It feels completely unnecessary. It may be a very small criticism and maybe something that I only pick up on, but I found it really distracting in that moment. The new added CGI is very much in the same vein as the optional CGI effects that they've been adding to the classic DVD and Blu-ray releases. There's things like the added effects on the processing machine, gold energy that emits from the Time Lord's eyes, views of planets from space, exterior shots of the World War I chateau, overhead shots of the Warzone central base of operations, added shots like the Citadel on Gallifrey, and shots of the TARDIS and side rats in flight that have been added as well. Now, some may argue that these shots where we see the Warzone base of operations are shown too often. This is really due to the nature of them cutting so many scenes, and it's really used to just create a smooth transition into the next scene. I enjoyed how this version opens up, and then it transitions into the title sequence after the bombardment scene. But I'm not gonna lie, there were moments where I was like, really? And this is where we get into the controversial changes they've decided to make to this new version. One of the things that has been heavily altered is the character of the War Chief. In the original version of the story, the War Chief is revealed to be one of the Doctor's own people, a renegade with a quest for power, and seems to know who the Doctor is. Beyond that, not much else was really revealed of the character's backstory, and he ends up being killed. However, through the years there have been a number of fan theories suggesting that this was an earlier incarnation of the Master, and in this version, it heavily implies that the War Chief is definitely the Master, by using the Master's theme from Series 3 and the Delgado Master theme throughout this new version. Now personally, I've never really cared for this theory because it feels like it's an unnecessary way of making everything within the Doctor Who universe all connected. And yes, there's clearly some similarities between the two characters, but I feel that there's enough differences to set them apart. If we consider the War Chief as the Master, it raises the question of why wouldn't the War Chief simply overthrow the Warlord and take control himself? Why wouldn't he use his powers of manipulation or hypnosis on the security chief to make him more obedient and prevent any sort of doubts about the War Chief's loyalty to the Warlord? Well, there's a simple answer for that, and that's the fact that the War Games was made in 1969, years before the Master was created and would make his first appearance in Terror of the Autons in 1971. Oh, also because he is now the Master, when the War Chief is shot and they drag his body away, you hear the sound of regeneration energy in the distance, implying that, he's not dead. But like I said, I much prefer the ambiguity of this character. I don't think everything has to be fully explained or connected within the Doctor Who universe, because it makes everything feel so small. Oh, don't ask me how the War Chief escapes as well after he's regenerated, when the fact that there's no power in the side rats to be able to operate. Yeah. I'm such a nerd, I'm clearly looking into this too much. There are also newly added shots during the trial sequence where the Doctor is presented with several options by the Time Lords for potential third incarnations as a part of his sentence. In this sequence, we see the 10th, 12th, 13th and 11th incarnations of the Doctor, all suggested as possibilities for his next incarnation. Now, even before this version was made, there have been fan edits all over YouTube, so this change isn't exactly mind-blowing, it's more here as a joke really. But personally, I feel like it's somewhat of a just unnecessary change that didn't really need to be there. I do find it amusing though that the photos used in this scene are all very dynamic poses of the Doctor holding something and looking directly into the camera, well, bar the exception of Jodie. But in the context of the show, how do these exist in universe? Like, did the Doctor do some sort of calendar photo shoot or something? I mean, it's really weird if you stop to think about it. Another newly added sequence is the regeneration, which now shows a full transition from Patrick Troughton into Jon Pertwee. Now, this is the same fan-made regeneration video that was made by the Confession Dial on YouTube, with some slight alterations here and there, like the change in music, and there's some flashbacks that happen before he regenerates of the Second Doctor's previous stories. And what this means is it pretty much ignores the whole Season 6B idea, whereas part of the Second Doctor's sentence before his regeneration, he was sent on missions by the Time Lords off screen, and the reason why that whole idea existed was to explain some of the continuity errors of the Second Doctor's appearances in subsequent stories like the 5 Doctors and the 2 Doctors. It's not a big thing, it's not something that really bothers me all that much, and the thing about these colorized versions is that the original stories still do exist, and these versions aren't meant to be a replacement of the originals. Overall, while the new version of the War Games has some truly spectacular enhanced visuals and offers a fresh appeal to a modern audience with its amazing colorization, it suffers from similar issues that were present in the Daleks in color. The editing style, which condenses the runtime to just 90 minutes, removes significant portions of the story, resulting in secondary characters who were more fleshed out in the original coming across as less important in this version. The new soundtrack feels overpowering at times, and some of the added changes to the story come across as feeling unnecessary. But other than that, I think that this is a major improvement over the Daleks in colour. Most newer audiences will certainly find the War Games in colour an entertaining experience, as it does streamline the story to a basic broad strokes version of the original. It just lacks the same level of depth though that made the original so great. I would still recommend watching this if you are curious about the new colorization. Go ahead and see it for yourself and see what you think of it. The one thing that I fully appreciate about these colorizations is that they provide fans with a new way of experiencing these stories. Now, 9 times out of 10, I'd rather go back and rewatch the original, but I admire the fact that this also gives new series fans a way of delving into classic Doctor Who and experiencing these stories for the very first time. However, if you haven't seen the original 10-episode version of the War Games, I highly encourage you to go check that out as well. You don't have to watch it all in one sitting, watch it over a couple of days, it's absolutely worth your time. But have you had a chance to see the War Games in colour? Be sure to tell me what you thought of it in the comment section down below.